Hello and welcome to Series 5 of Autism in Conversation with Auticon, a podcast from Auticon, the largest autistic majority company in the world. The podcast aims to help raise greater understanding and appreciation of neurodiversity through fascinating conversations with fantastic guests. Hosted by me, Carrie Grant, MBE, each episode will feature inspirational guests from all walks of life who each share a passion for making the world more inclusive. We'll be talking about the many benefits of hiring neurodivergent talent, through to some of the more common challenges faced by autistic adults, navigating the workplace, plus so much more. All of my 4 children are neurodivergent, and in January 2023, I received my own autism diagnosis as well. So this is a subject I'm incredibly passionate about. I'm really looking forward to facilitating some great conversations about autism and all things neurodiversity. Hopefully, we can all learn something new along the way and maybe even be inspired to do something new or different ourselves. Enjoy the show. Hi everybody, welcome to today's episode of Autism in Conversation with Auticon. I'm so excited that we're covering this subject today. It's February, the month of Valentine's Day, which got us thinking about relationships, whether that be romantic relationships, friendships, working relationships, and beyond. As someone who's only recently received my autism diagnosis, it's certainly been interesting for me looking back on my relationships through my autistic lens. And I know my guests today will have plenty to say on the topic as well. My guests are Seth Cavendish, social media manager at Hiki, the world's largest dating app for autistic people; Ashley Crombie, neuroinclusion advisor at Auticon; and clinical psychologist and author of Parenting for Humans, Dr. Emma Svanberg. Welcome to the show, everybody, and thank you so much for joining me today. Now, this is an exclusively autistic panel today, which is super exciting. I'm not sure if we've had that before. I love that. So to kick things off, I'd like to just hear a little bit about your own, how you came to find out that you were autistic and what that was like. Let's start with Ashley.
Well, it was a long journey, as it is with many autistic people. I spent a lot of time going back and forth with the depression, anxiety, OCD journey, to which I came to the realization and pursued that. And it sort of was that moment where it was like, oh, of course, that makes so much sense. And then grappling through the whole thing of looking back in the past retrospectively and all of that. So yeah, it was a journey, which is a story that lots of people share.
Yeah, and also I think, Ashley, that thing of having one diagnosis that might be just anxiety, not just anxiety, but it's solely anxiety, and then another one, and then another one. And before you know it, when you put them all together, actually, you're simply autistic.
Yeah, it was sort of diagnosing the separate aspects that make up autism separately. And then it wasn't until they were all there that it all sort of came together as, oh, actually, it's this. It's like, I went through lots of different puzzle pieces until I got to the full picture. So
yeah. And how long ago was that, Ashley?
Fairly recently. I was on the waiting list for a very long time, again, as most people are, especially with the discrepancies between who accepts private diagnosis and who doesn't. It's complicated. So yeah, that was somewhat recently, within the past sort of 2 years. But I had been somewhat self-identifying for a long time before that, although questioning myself all the time, have I just got this wrong, or am I just, it's still a little bit confusing to me now, to be honest. I'm still coming to terms with it in a way. Yeah.
I think sometimes it's like auditing your entire life, isn't it? And it's like it comes down in layers like water through sand.
Yeah.
That you go, okay, there's a little bit there it hasn't reached. Okay, that's why I do that. That's why I think that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Seth, how about for you?
Yeah, I have a late diagnosis story that even that is a little unconventional. My mom took me to a few evaluations as a kid, but I never received a diagnosis for anything. And I guess the adults in my life decided that I still had some social problems. So I was put in this after school program, like a friendship camp was what it was presented to me as. And it just became kind of like a weird memory in my childhood. And it wasn't until I got great grades in high school, but I just did not make the transition to college well, totally burnt out, and was just trying to find a very easy job. And online, I saw this company was saying, we'll give you like a $600 sign-on bonus if you speed through all the training in a week. So I was like, okay, let me do all this training. And 10 minutes in, I'm realizing, oh, I'm training to be a friendship camp counselor. That was ABA. Like what? Like, so I had to look back on everything. I got right into the research. I found the neurodiversity movement online and all of the information and people talking about themselves because they had missed being diagnosed. And I think that the fact that like I was taken in for evaluations, it's not like autism wasn't in my story. Everyone was just like, oh no, like this kid's fine. And I think that like it was relieving, like most people find it, because it provides an explanation for my challenges. But I think getting all of the trauma of a bunch of trusted adults telling you like there's something wrong with you and you need to fix it, but without the explanation of a self-identity, that was really difficult. But since finding it, since getting an autism diagnosis, I think it's helped me feel connected to a broader struggle of disabled people for like social equity, and just has brought me to understanding that the belief, ableism, the belief that some people are just inherently born worse, that is the foundation of misogyny, of racism, of xenophobia, of everything else. So it's my autism diagnosis has brought me to having collective liberation as a special interest. Not something I would have ever anticipated, but it's completely changed my life, and it's now part of my job. So
I relate.
yeah,
So
it's
relate.
great.
Can I just ask, Seth, because you mentioned a couple of things there, and I just want to check that I've got this right. So you talked about friendship camp in school. Are you saying that was so ABA, just for listeners that don't know what ABA is, or why so many people that are autistic or in the autism community do not like ABA? That's just how we respond to it. Could you tell us, what was friendship camp? Was it linked to ABA then? And what is ABA?
So ABA stands for Applied Behavior Analysis. I know more about it because I did end up finishing the training program and I worked in it for about 3 years. My thing, I'm not in contact with my mom who was deciding to put me in it. But I remember they had clipboards back then when I was working as a tech or an RBT, registered behavior therapist. They gave us iPads. They would hire anyone to do that job. It was very worrying how many of my peers just did not really want to be there or understand. They just were like, oh, a sign-on bonus. So what I was in as a kid was mostly like, don't talk about your preferred interests, make eye contact. And they were marking like things on I'm sure it was like some sort of token system. And I remember they would figure out what my special interest was, which had recently become Pokemon. And then they would use it against me to get me to act in certain ways. Yeah. Pokemon's great. It's autistic culture. It's the guy who made it's autistic. It's just going around identifying everything. Yeah. Anyways, but they use it against you. So I was in ABA as a kid, the autism behavior therapy. And then I worked in it as an adult and was like, oh, I have to go back to school. I had to get the diagnosis in order to get accommodations. And my insurance would have only covered it until I was 21, covered an evaluation, which I learned because I called my insurance on my 22nd birthday. And the operator that I got that day looked the other way and she approved an evaluation for me. And I would not, I don't think, like Ashley said, I don't think I'd feel as empowered in identifying as autistic if I didn't have someone check my work. I don't know. I might go back to school and become an autism specialist. But right now, I barely got a diagnosis.
Wowza. You just realize how many people probably just slip through and don't ever get that help and you've got that, you're young. So to have, I mean, not as young as you should have been, but you're young, compared, I'm thinking of, I was just diagnosed last year at 57 or something, it's a different situation, isn't it? And Emma, for you, what about you? What happened with your diagnosis?
I think I had a really similar journey to Ashley in that kind of thinking about different diagnoses. Again, like we talked about earlier, I look back on things and I can see the strands that were running throughout my life that I just never put together under the autism umbrella. So I had things like I was always very fatigued as a child. I went to the doctor endless times with chronic tonsillitis, lots of kind of physical health problems. And then, kind of went through university, did psychology, learned about autism, never once thought, yeah, that sounds like I can relate to that, because the prevailing ideas about autism then, but even still now, are so far removed from my experience of autism.
Yes.
And then I started looking into it more because of other family members, starting to think about, particularly where you can see an unmasked autistic child and you go, oh, that's maybe what I would have been like had I not been keeping a lid on this all of that time. And then started to think about it, didn't still relate to autism, was thinking ADHD. I'm a trauma specialist, so lots of the sort of symptoms, I guess, or traits that I might have seen as autistic now, previously I would put under traumatic experiences or chronic stress. And it sort of flipped all of that on its head when I started to think about hyper empathy. I started learning about hyper empathy. And I read this article in The Guardian, which was about autistic therapists and how so many therapists are autistic, and that the autistic traits can give you such brilliant therapeutic skills because you've learned how
Wow.
to communicate. You've learned how to spot patterns, or you do very naturally spot patterns.
I didn't know
And
this. This is
literally, I
amazing.
read this article and I just had these light bulbs going off all over the place. And then spoke to a colleague of mine who is a psychologist who specializes in diagnosis for late diagnosed adults. And she said to me, well, basically that's what psychology and therapy is, though, isn't it? It's a scripted conversation where you can take your time to really think about what somebody's saying. And it's maybe the one socially acceptable place where you can go, but what do you really mean? And can you explain that a little bit further? And can we dig a bit deeper? So for me, it's always been a really rewarding job, because I can absolutely get to the bottom of what somebody is actually meaning, and it's a helpful thing to do. So it was this amazing
That's
realization
mind
where I kind of
blowing.
go,
My
oh,
head, that's mind blowing.
it's incredible. So I've
Wow.
sort of created this job without even realizing, created a job for myself that absolutely fit with my autistic ways of operating,
And that's
which
so
is
important, isn't it?
amazing.
That you have the environment in which you find that environment where you thrive.
Yes. And I
That's what I'm
also,
hearing from all of you.
yeah. And I also kind of created my own pathway in that. So I do a lot of online work. I work for myself. I often found that I couldn't work as part of a larger system, never really understood why. So again, all of those things kind of start to fall into place when I got my diagnosis or started exploring this further.
I love it. Thank you so much for all three of you for sharing your journey into the into the autism world. So let's move on. I'm so excited we're covering this today. It's really interesting. Relationships, it's a massive subject area and one that affects us all. Now, I'm not just talking about love. I'm talking about friendships. There's work relationships, the way we relate to ourselves, even or relationships with animals or stuff or things. There's relationships are happening all around us and within us. I wanted to start with, maybe this is a bit too profound question, but do autistic people love differently? I'm going to throw that to Seth first, because obviously you run Hickey, which is the dating app for autistic people. Do autistic people love differently?
This is an answer that has been like 5 years in the making. I didn't think so, but before I had a diagnosis, I was really obsessed with this boy. And I remember I Googled, can a person be your special interest? Because I was questioning, am I on the spectrum?
Yeah.
And
my husband is definitely my special interest,
right?
for sure. 37 years in, babes, it works.
but unfortunately, what I found in the results wasn't like any information about like handling this big feeling or how to express it. It was, I'm not even going to say the name. It was a website full of women that were coming together to complain about how marrying an autistic man had ruined their lives and how cold, and it was an entire website, not even a forum. And I spent way too much time reading all of this about like how I was just unfit as a partner and like, and it devastated me. And to then start dating autistic people and start unmasking and seeing my entire world change and my friendships change around me and stuff too. I think that I don't know how to describe it because I don't think I've ever fully loved or been loved by not people that I won't say aren't autistic, but there's just something there that is, I guess, that's why Hiki exists. It's a very difficult question to answer. I wouldn't think yes, but I think the world thinks yes. And I think that that's why when autistic people get together, it feels so special, because it's like, finally. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great answer. Ashley, what's your view on this?
I think it depends what we mean by love when we say love. If in terms of love as a feeling or as an emotion, maybe not, maybe slightly more pronounced, I don't know. But in terms of like love as an expression or as a connection to another, I would say yes. I would say it's more what I would call ultra loyal, and that's not just with your partners but with your friends. I know for me, I have a very strong moral compass that I have like my own determined moral compass, and so for that, it's interesting because you don't tend to deviate around that. Like, yes, that can make you quite rigid, and a lot of the time I get hung up on the principle of things. So in that way, it is slightly different because the principle of the matter would outweigh the emotion of love for me. It would be more important that they met my principles and my morals over the feeling of love, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, I would say that I'm one of those people that are quite emotionally sort of closed off, I would say. Not that I don't love, not that I don't care about people, but it doesn't frame importance in my life in terms of the relationships. What's more important to me is the moral compass and the principles. So
I love that.
Yeah.
And that's valid. Absolutely valid. I love that. Emma, for you, what do you think about that question? Do people that are autistic love differently?
I think short answer, possibly yes, in that what you were talking about there actually made me think about how we connect. And if we think about love as a form of connection, maybe we just connect
Or
differently.
attachment. Yeah.
And I've been reading a lot about, I don't know whether you've come across this concept of empathy disequilibrium, which is, when I first started learning about hyperempathy in autism, which was something that I'd never heard of before, that I really personally related to, I can really see that kind of strong, sometimes overwhelming emotion. That could be love, or it could be grief, or it could be hate, but that whatever the emotion is, it can be so strong and so consuming.
It's big.
That you either kind of get overwhelmed by it, or it can be really enjoyable, or you might also push it away because actually it just feels a bit much. Or there's that then kind of the other side of the spectrum where we might empathize cognitively. We kind of might understand what's going on in someone's mind, but we're not necessarily sort of feeling emotionally connected to them. So I feel like it's probably very different for different autistic people, that for some people, love can be consuming and overwhelming and amazing. But for other autistic people, maybe it is something that feels a little bit more cognitive, and it's a bit more about a shared interest or a different kind of connection. And I imagine it's the same for neurotypicals, that kind of, there must be a spectrum of different emotions that we feel.
Just makes me realize how much more of an opportunity we have to explore this stuff as autistic people, because we're thinking about it. And so there isn't that expectation on us to be one thing. So that we kind of open the floodgates to exploring what does that look like to have a relationship that is based around a mutual special interest, or sitting in silence and never really having to talk. And that works I just think neurotypicals would be really bothered by this stuff, and perhaps autistic people would be less bothered. Do you think there's almost like more permission for autistic people to be different in that way in their relationships, Emma?
I think there could be. I wish there was, because I think about my own experience of relationships, and I know that I was trying to squeeze myself into a neurotypical way of relating. So the idea of relating in a more autistic friendly way feels quite new to me. And I wonder what that is like when you feel that you have had that permission and that acceptance to communicate and show up and connect in a way that feels more authentic to you. I mean, it can offer permission to relate to people in very different kind of non-normative ways. But it means going against the grain in order to be able to do that. And so you need to be able to accept that in yourself, but you also need to find people who will accept that way of communicating. And those things together can be quite difficult to find.
And with Hickey, Seth, what do you find, I mean, in your work, or if you want to talk about your personal life as well, just relationships are complicated. What would be different about Hickey in terms of like matching people up, and how do they experience relationships? Is it just like any other dating site, or do you see those differences?
Yeah, as someone who has pretty much only used different dating apps to make friends my entire life, like misusing dating apps because getting outside and meeting people in person can be so difficult. Having Hickey match people based off of special interests and offering, we have a tab where people can match directly one-on-one, profile to profile. We also have a community tab where people can just kind of comment on each other's posts based off of shared interests, which has more of a fly on the wall energy to it. And it's absolutely true. Like sometimes I just read through all of the the traditional autism criteria and I kind of laugh a little bit. I'm like, me, my friend, me, and the restricted interests. Yeah, I am very restricted, and it's almost intolerable sometimes for me to engage in other topics for too long. And so having so many people in the feed that I'm seeing talking about stuff that I want to just jump in on, even if I might not be like near them physically, like it's helping me even have online conversations where I might be kind of socially burnt out. So yeah, special interests are key. And I'm glad that we've centered that in our matching.
Yeah, I love the idea that actually being online can be an easier way for autistic people sometimes. Obviously, not all autistic people here, we know that on this program for sure. We talk about that all the time, but just a way of having, like you said, it perhaps lower arousal in terms of, not having to be in the same space as, being able to switch your camera off or walk away. Do you think that online world helps our autistic community?
Absolutely. Because I'll speak for myself. I need to know a certain amount about someone before I can even invest the energy into trying to start a conversation. And being able to read someone's bio has helped me a lot, especially as a trans person. Like you just kind of have to know what kind of person someone is before you try to engage, and know if you're going to be safe and respected in that. I'm sure a lot of autistic people feel that too, because there's all these microaggressions and things like that. But yeah, and also just the pressure of getting to talk to someone. When you match with someone on Hickey with our new update, information from their profile and their pictures populates in the chat. So you can see basically all of their interests and their photos right before you, right in front of the message bar. And it can kind of just facilitate like, okay, no one's looking at me, waiting for me to respond. And I think establishing some rapport over like a non-spoken format can be very beneficial, even for people who have speech available to them, to just kind of get more comfortable connecting with someone before you put all that energy into
yeah, exactly, doing the big sociable thing. Yeah. And Ashley, what about for you in relationships? I mean, obviously we can talk about work relationships. You're working at Auticon, and relationships going into the workplace is going to be a huge deal, and often the thing that can be the most exhausting thing about work, right? I mean, what are the issues that people have, both as the employers and the employees?
I can't speak for all of the people that I work with, but I can say for myself, one aspect that has always come up in the past for me and other people is how you bond as a team in a relationship, and you do team bonding and you talk about your own private lives and what your interests are, but it can get very blurred about where is team building, where is staying professional work, and where's that little middle ground. So I think that's why lots of people might, autistic people, for example, might want to avoid the work Christmas party, for example, because, everyone having a drink, being a bit merry, all those lines get really blurred. And I know for me, it makes me quite uncomfortable because I think, I don't know if I should know that about you, as a work colleague. I don't even know that kind of thing about my own friends. So in terms of managing the relationship, it can be challenging about how much of yourself do you let off for people to get to know you, and how much do you hold back to remain professional. It's a really difficult line to get right.
And if I can add into that, Ashley, I'm thinking about a friend of mine who is autistic, went to work and went into the work kitchen and was like, I cannot bear the fact that people do not wash their coffee cups up. And so I need to know that all the coffee cups are washed up and put in the cupboard. And people began to it's like microaggression. Like, why are they having to do that? How much, as a neuroinclusion advisor, sometimes we think about the big things that someone might be doing in their work, but sometimes it's just the kitchen that is the place where microaggression and bullying can happen. And if you've had bullying in your childhood as well, that can be really terrible for your mental health.
I think using your example that you just gave there, it either becomes oh, don't worry, that person will do it, or it can be with the whole workplace politics that often go on in some places. It could almost be this passive aggressive sort of, oh, they think they're better than us because they clear up, that, and it puts a real strain on relationships sometimes in the working place. The working place is a very strange environment to be in, navigating it with not just the social navigations or the expected norms. You've also then got the own company culture, you've got the workplace politics, you've then got the hierarchies. There's so much to navigate in the workplace.
And when we think about, I'm just following my train of thought as you're speaking and thinking about, that person that, because you talk about the politics of the company, the person that actually can't bear the fact that people haven't done the washing up, and eventually they shout at someone. And I mean, a neurotypical person might also do that. How do we advise autistic people or other people that aren't autistic to cope with someone who might be in overwhelm and might just shout out a sentence that they later regret? Like, what can be done to pave the way for companies understanding that kinds of behavior? That to me is quite normal, but for other people that might not be.
No, that's true. I think that's where roles like my own role step in, where we have coaching for people, for autistic people in the workplace. There's coaching so that we would be able to discuss the situation and maybe come up with a way to avoid it before we get to the shouting. But there's also another aspect to the role, which is the neuroinclusion advisor part of things. And that's looking at the company culture, that's looking at preempting things, having agreed actions that then contribute to the workplace culture. So part of the workplace culture now is we all clear up after ourselves, or it's done on a schedule that's rolled, or there's so many things that just takes that person with knowledge of neurodiversity to step in and just bridge the gap sometimes. And that's really the core of what I do with my role.
Ashley, thank you. And for you, Emma, when you're doing your therapy and you meet with people who are just acing it at work, they're doing really well in their work, or maybe they're doing really well in their friendships, but they still have those moments where overload means that something happens that they, and they do go blah. How can we help ourselves not to do that? But how do we avoid those situations?
Well, I think, the first thing to say is that I because I'm so new to my own autistic identity, and I'm aware that I've worked with autistic adults, but actually sometimes it's been autistic adults who we were both unaware that they were autistic. And I'm now doing further training in sort of therapy for autistic people, because I've had that experience myself. And I know many clients of mine have had the experience where mainstream therapeutic techniques actually aren't adequate for autistic people. So I'm kind of heavily caveating what I'm saying, because I think a lot of the work that I've done in the past probably wasn't particularly helpful. And I think a lot of therapy can really encourage autistic people to just mask more. So without really realizing it, inadvertently, often I think lots of techniques encourage people to, for example, avoid something that is going to end up feeling dysregulating for other people, rather than how do you cope with that thing that actually is dysregulating for you without dissociating or suppressing it, or finding ways to be able to cope with that emotional ups and downs that will happen when we're in the workplace or when we're in other relationships. So I think my answer is that I don't really know yet. It's something that I'm hoping to find out, is actually how do we express our needs or encourage the people around us to express their needs in a way that is truly accepting, and not in a way that limits their ability to be at work or be in a relationship as their whole selves.
Yeah, the whole self is being seen for who you are. I suppose also agency and advocating for yourself in the early stages, so that it doesn't get to the point where you're literally melting down over a coffee cup when you're acing it everywhere else in the company. But that particular thing is really, or noise or something that's happening is really causing you an issue, being able to speak up. But it's hard sometimes for us to find that agency if we've been in education systems that have not really encouraged, or families that have not encouraged us to speak up for ourselves.
I think it can be really tricky too, because when, and I don't know whether other people have had this experience, but when you're not identified as autistic, you can think of that acing part of you as being your whole self. And then the part of you that might have the meltdown over the coffee cup, or might burn out, or might not be able to show up in the way that you want to because you're burning out, or because you're feeling just not on form, you kind of ignore that part. You sort of push it away. And I guess that's internalized ableism and masking and all of those things that allow you or make you kind of present yourself in a certain way, particularly in the workplace. So I wonder if in some ways there's something about how can you either do the acing while also accepting what the repercussion is of that acing, which often is the meltdown over the coffee cup, right?
The
Actually,
full package.
do those things go hand in hand? And if you're going to kind of allow yourself to feel or have accommodations at work, or to be able to show up in a way that is more accepting of you, does that mean that you're going to be acing it a bit less because you don't feel like you have to try quite so hard to please the people around you or to achieve to that level? So I wonder how that fits, that actually, is that not the other side of the same coin? If you can ace it in one way, then there's going to be some sort of repercussion to that. How do we find that balance?
It makes me realise how much we have to dig a little bit deeper into this stuff. And perhaps that is also the work of auticon as well, to dig into those areas, because what you've just said there is so important. Seph, I wanted to ask you something. I have 4 children, 3 of whom are trans or trans non-binary and queer. And I'm thinking about one of the things I think that this is just my opinion, that autistic people often in their sexuality and gender seem to be way freer than our neurotypical cohort. It's like, actually, this is who I am, and I can't be anything other than who I am. And I love that honesty that my kids have, which is amazing. Dating, though, can we talk about what it's like? Because when we think of dating apps, for many people listening to this podcast, they'll go, oh, that's a girl and a boy that are going to meet each other. And, and then they got to get together, and they either do or they don't have a relationship. Is there anything different about the way that we work with our trans non-binary or queer sexualities? What has Hiki found in that space?
Oh, the question being turned to Hiki at the end threw me off a little bit. No, because I've been on the back. Okay, so I'll say this much. I'll talk about my experience as a queer person and how it's informed how I've used my voice to shape the app a little bit in tandem with all of the other trans people using Hiki. I think that I talk a lot about itchy tags. I mean, all autistic people, there's this like in the literature, right? But I talk about in my writing and in my complaining to my friends, the itchy tags of, like, we talk about those microaggressions, feeling misunderstood by someone, whether it's you're not understanding that me having a problem with this coffee cup isn't me feeling better than you. It's just a thing that I need. Like, please step into my world and understand this. It's almost like a minefield of just knowing who is going to not only be familiar with this this grammatical concept presented in this way, and that tag might be too itchy for me to even have a relationship with that person on some days when I'm dysregulated and I just can't really tolerate the world not understanding me. And I think that we talk in the ADHD world about the desire to provide more context with parentheses. Always, I want to just provide more and more context. And so we don't just have man, woman, and non-binary on Hiki. Under each of those categories, you can describe how you identify under that. So some people, you can use woman and specify trans woman, or you can type in your own gender and define that way. And our matching system is based off of a 3-point, which is man, woman, and non-binary. And people can just, what I like about it is it's not a space where anybody is separated. And I'm seeing a lot of people that I think I would ignorantly assume would be cisgender and heterosexual. I'm seeing like what I would say are like, oh, these are like normal looking straight boys, and they're all saying that they're looking for love and they're interested in non-binary people. So I think some folks are like waking up and knowing like, okay, the weird ones, they like me. I got to get on board. And it's beautiful to watch. Yeah.
I love this. I am a Jewish mama, so I am literally signing my children up to Hiki after we finish this podcast.
Please.
Right, kids, you're all signing up.
I've become evangelical about it, honestly. Like I see a friend that I met recently that I met from like a friend of a friend. He just, I talk about my work, so he downloaded the app. At dinner the other night, he goes quiet for a bit while my other friend and I are having a conversation. We're like, hey buddy, what have you been up to? He's like, I just matched with someone who's messaging me about things that are so specific that like, this is my dream girl. And I was like, wow, like this, I know that this isn't just a job to me, but like to see the effect like that just so quickly.
You are the ultimate matchmaker.
Oh, it's thrilling. Yeah. Emma, you too. I hear you saying that like, oh, you don't fully know what it's like. Just even on friends, get on Hiki, please.
Yeah. And I think friendships, can we talk about how important or unimportant friendships are, or if they're different? I mean, I know we talked about love, but friendships, I don't know, often autistic people talk about friendships. It's something that perhaps has been incredibly painful in childhood, but different in adulthood sometimes. Ashley, let's go to you.
Friendships is a funny one for me. I am good at having lots of acquaintances. And, you know, when I'm out, I can be quite fun and charming and all of these things and attract people. But sustaining friendships, I just can't seem to be able to do it. I either get too socially worn out to keep the friendship going, especially if my friendship's with a non-autistic person. I think they prefer to have more regular touch points. You can't just sort of go off the radar and then pop back and be like, oh, hi, I'm back again, you know. So there's a bit of a mismatch there. But also the other thing that I will always talk about is my sense of principle and what's right and what's wrong and justice and all of this is so strong that I find it hard to keep friends. If we have an argument, for example, I just think, well, how can I be your friend? And it's just so black and white with things. And I don't know, that might be a bit of a emotionally protective thing that I've developed over the years with the masking and everything. But as far as I'm aware, I find friendships really hard to sustain. My people that I would call my friends, I have my neighbor, my husband, my brother. So they're people that are close to me anyway. I find people outside of what I call the trunk. I've got this analogy of how I position people in my lives, and it's a tree. And so the people who are in the trunk are the people that I can tolerate them deviating from my moral compass a little bit because they're, you know, really embedded into the trunk. And then other people are just like branches and leaves that can just sort of go if necessary. So
that's really helpful.
Yeah, it's a bit of a strange way to categorize people, but I just really like categories. It just helps me make sense of everything. And so yeah, friendships is challenging, and I suppose it's because I don't feel like I need friendships. I get enough social interaction from whoever's nearby me already, so I don't actively seek new friends, which is probably why I can sort of discard friends. I don't want to say discard, that's not a good word to use, but
I think just use the words you want to use. I think it's because we're not used to those words.
Yeah.
But I'm also aware, thank you, Ashley, Emma, that often I have seen autistic people pretty much broken by friendships and the pain of not having friends, or the pain of a broken friendship. Like what Ashley's saying there is, in that trunk, that's a safety area. So those people are there. But beyond that, for some of our autistic community, they get really hurt by relationships. How can we change that?
I don't know that it's something for the autistic community to change. I think it's something for people outside the autistic community to consider. I'm thinking about the double empathy bind and that kind of sense of autistic people or neurodivergent people often making such effort to learn the language of the neurotypical world, and that not really happening the other way round. But I mean, I'm hoping that with these kind of conversations and people being so much more open about neurodivergence, I really hope that, like other kind of diversity, there's a more awareness of what a neurodivergent ally might look like. And part of that might be around, how do I ensure that this person can feel safe with me? I feel like, especially for women maybe, or internalized autistic people, that kind of the fawn response that can so often come hand in hand with masking, where
Yes.
people learn to people please and meet other people's needs. And, for me, that kind of showed up in building lots of communities around me, but not necessarily feeling like I was part of those communities. It was much more kind of having community. But actually, what you were saying, Ashley, there about that realization that I actually don't really need people very much. And when I do need people, when I want that social connection, it needs to be in quite a specific way, which doesn't really fit in with some of the expectations that other people have about what a friendship should look like. I think that the other side of that fawning for lots of people is the realization of, for many autistic people, that there is a certain level of interpersonal vulnerability that we come with, that comes with us, that we might not always be aware of. We can, because we're much more likely to take people at face value, to believe what somebody tells us, to assume that what somebody is saying is the truth, we're not always so skilled at picking up on that more implicit communication or reading between the lines, that there are times that other people will take advantage of that, and that can leave you in a vulnerable position, which I think particularly when you're younger and you're getting to grips with the complexity of social interaction and communication, I think that can be really heartbreaking. And I remember incidents like that in my own childhood. I'm also so aware of that happening for lots of children now, where, particularly post-pandemic, where that kind of rush to get back to school and rush to kind of catch up with things, when kids missed out on sort of 2 years of learning how to communicate with their peers. So that puts autistic people at even more of a disadvantage if the goal is to try and fit in some way. So I think there, which often is in mainstream school, I think that hurt, and it is heartbreaking, and I think it can be really painful. Part of that is around teaching children and teaching ourselves and teaching those around us what does a good friendship look like? How do we know that we have a good friendship, that we are in a good relationship with somebody? What are the kind of warning signs for us to look out for, either in the relationship or within our own bodies, that something feels a little bit off? Because I think that can take a little bit longer for us to figure out sometimes.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful. Guys, I want to speak about the work environments that you're in. Seth, you are with a group of people who are autistic majority. So talk to me about what is it like being in a company or within a company where it's majority autistic?
Yeah, I will say that this is my first company that I've worked at. Very grateful that I don't have much to compare it to. But from what I understand of the corporate world, I'll talk a little bit about what our meetings are like. We meet twice a week in the morning. It's synchronous, but always optional if you need notes taken for you. Not expected to have your mic or your camera on. The rest of how we communicate is via Slack or email or individual phone or voice calls. Every interaction, I think it should be the foundation of any relationship, but our working relationships are rooted in mutual calibration. It's kind of like, what do you need? What can I do first to set you up to do this part of it? And I think that a lot of companies are probably already like this, but not in the context of people having certain diagnoses, right? Like it's almost inherently a little bit more of a medicalized experience for us to be like, oh yes, well I have this symptom in my history, like I've struggled with this, right? But I think because of how it's been presented to us and how we've reclaimed it and recontextualized it, we understand ourselves a little bit better in a working way and can communicate about that better. And I feel so grateful. Yeah. I don't know how I would manage.
I love that. I love that. I feel that's going to be what you just said is going to be so helpful. Ashley, you're doing a PhD, aren't you, in your work? Tell me about that.
Okay, so I'm in my final year, so I'm in the write-up stages at the moment. So hopefully it will be out of my life soon. So the research itself looks at autistic experiences as communicated through internet memes. So using memes to look at collective experiences, but also highly individual experiences as well. And I think memes are able to do that in a way that is humorous, a shared, agreed sort of experience. You know, other autistic people might share the meme and say, oh yes, absolutely, I agree with that, that's happened to me, or that hasn't happened to me. But also very individual, in that somebody might see a meme and be like, oh yeah, I can kind of relate, but my experience was slightly different. So it really highlights that an autistic experience is not, you know, a blanket statement for everyone. Also, what I'm looking at is challenging stereotypes, of course, and sort of fostering this acceptance of autistic experience. I think using memes, a lot of non-autistic people know what memes are. They use memes for their own experiences. And so by sharing memes in relation to autistic experiences, I think it provides a way to look at that person's experience and think, oh, I kind of get what you're saying. Like, for example, you know, if you say, oh, I can't wear that jumper because, you know, the label or something like that, which is a meme that's come up in the research. And if you say that to people who don't understand that sensory experience, they find it really hard to understand. So they just think, like, what, like, how can you not wear a jumper, you know? But with the meme, it says, you know, I can't, what the label looks like, and it's a picture of just like a label in a jumper, and then what the label feels like, and it's a cactus, you know? So I think it just really helps other people to understand the nuance of the experience without the autistic person having to over explain every aspect of their experience, you know? So that's what it's looking at, basically.
I love that. And it reminds me of all the people that I know and meet that when they're wearing a jumper, they've always got a hole, which is just down this side where they've cut the label out and it hasn't worked. The numbers of us that have got a hole on the left-hand side. Emma, you've also got some incredible work that you're doing online with communities, with parents and such. Could you talk to us about that?
Yes, so I started doing some work on social media years ago now. I started blogging. So my area of specialism is perinatal work and maternal mental health. So I work around pregnancy, birth and the early years. And as part of that, I set up an online community, which is called The Village, which I think we started it around 2016. It's a long time ago now, but it really exploded over the pandemic because so many people, we used to meet up in real life and then so many people came online. So now it's a community of people, of parents and parents-to-be from all over the world, which is incredible. And it's a group that's run on therapeutic principles. So it's very much about showing up to get some solidarity and support for adults, for parents, rather than a place where you ask kind of child development questions or how your potty training tips and the kind of things that you often get on parenting groups. And then as part of that, about 2 years ago, we set up a branch group, which is specifically for parents who are neurodivergent themselves, or they suspect that their child might be neurodivergent. And that's really taken off over the last year or so, so it's become kind of two separate groups, but they very much kind of feed into one another. And I'm there. I mean, it's quite big now. It's about 1,000 people in the main group. So it means that I can't kind of be as active as I used to be. But I also have a really lovely team of parents who help me moderate, who've been part of the group for a long time. And the one rule is that there cannot be any judgment around what anybody is saying. And it does really feel like quite a safe online space.
I love that. Wow. I love the work that you're all up to. I'm so impressed with you guys. Just incredible. And our final section, we wanted to look at groups, companies, situations that you just feel like this group, this organization is knocking it out the park. Something or someone that for you just think, yeah, that's who I want to shout out today. Ashley, let's go to you first. Who would that be for you?
I mean, auticon, definitely. I only just started with auticon about 3 months ago, and I had seen that they were advertising for jobs for a few years. So autocon's always been on my radar, and I've always really wanted to join. So I'm really pleased to now be here. I just think the work that they're doing in terms of such a unique and robust way of putting neurodiversity into policies and culture over, what everyone says about the tick box exercise, it's more than just awareness training, and it's providing actual work and employment for autistic consultants who may well not, who've got all the skills, all the tech skills, extremely intelligent people, but can't seem to get past the interview stage, for those reasons. So I think for 2 reasons, auticon are really making such a big difference by providing active employment for autistic people and moving to change the work landscape to be more neuro-inclusive.
Yeah, I love that, and I can't agree with you more. Okay, let's go to Seth. Who would you want to give a shout out to?
Yeah, I volunteer. I do peer support with an organization called Neuromancers. And like you mentioned, Emma, we're very aware that conventional psychiatry, conventional therapy has harmed a lot of neurodivergent people. And so we run these peer support groups. They're called constellations that are topic-based. And our central mentality is that we want to give people the opportunity to fall in love with being neurodivergent and understand that a lot of the challenges that you're facing are not just attributed to you. A lot of them are connected to larger systems, and will help you maybe, if conventional therapy is not the route you want to go down, maybe just finding your role and contributing to feeling like meaningful change in those systems, or just having a better understanding and pride. Yeah. So neuromancers.
I love that. So that's neuromancers. I love that. Great word. Okay, Emma, and for you, who would that be?
I'm going to give a massive shout out to Catherine Astor, who's a psychotherapist, and she runs the Late Discovered Club, which is a circle membership group and also the podcast. When I first found her circles, I joined one of her groups just as I was about to get my diagnosis, but I consumed her podcast in days. I just had her in my ears constantly, because so many of the stories that people were talking about on there, I mean, it was just like looking in a mirror. So I don't think she realizes how many people's lives she's changed because she's put those stories out into the world. So that would be my big thank you and shout out. And she has a book that is going to come out, I think, next year. So that will be amazing.
Catherine Astor. Okay, wonderful. I love those answers. Very different. And let's finally, the last question I have for you. If you could look at the landscape over the next few years and see what the future might hold, what would you love to see? What would be like a real gain for you in the next few years? What would you like to see happening in our community? Let's go to Ashley first.
Not specifically for the community, but for society at large. I would really love to redefine this concept of rudeness and what is rude, and being direct isn't rude, being honest isn't rude. I mean, I know the difference between being rude and being direct, and I just, I would never be rude to someone, but I would be honest and perhaps direct about things. And I think if we can redefine that, it would help with so much social anxiety about people getting the wrong idea about you, first of all, and thinking that you're rude when you're not. But also in terms of how we move together, all of us, I think it's more beneficial that we stop judging people for being rude, whatever that is, and that's something that I'm still going to always wait for, this redefinition of rudeness.
That's such a brilliant one. That really reminds me of when I first started work on Fame Academy, and I was a judge for several years. And to begin with, people were like, wow, she's a bit rude, a bit direct. By the time we were a few weeks in, people were like, I love her because she always tells the truth.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting journey, that with speaking in a way that's direct and perhaps packaged in a slightly different way for us as autistic people.
And something that's always come up for me is that I'm either rude, blunt, or the phrase that often comes with me is, she's really nice when you get to know her. So
I think you're great straight off the bat, personally. Okay, Seth, let's go to you. I love that you've opened up this future thing with that. It's brilliant. Seth, what would you don't have to make it personal either. You could take it wherever you want. Seth, what would you like to see in the next 10 years?
I would like to see autistic people have lives full of people that love and value them. And I think that a culture that is less concerned with rudeness or centering our own comfort and understanding that everybody's going through something a little different that we don't understand, I think it'll make it a lot easier for us to navigate the world. I'm someone that has used an autism diagnosis almost as a shield to kind of explain things to people. And I think that if we didn't have to do that, it would be a lot more comfortable. And I think the fact that, you guys know my story and why I know that self-diagnosis is so important. That's why we allow self-diagnosis and people who are even just exploring whether or not they're autistic to come on Hiki, because I think that when you see other people and you're empowered to be more of yourself, you automatically become someone whose presence changes the world a little bit. I'm sure all of the people that have not liked us and that we've rubbed the wrong way, that we're making them confront something that they're uncomfortable with. And I know we're going to keep doing that, and the world will keep changing around us.
Wow. Emma, these are hard to follow.
I know, I don't want to follow that one. Okay, I'm going to bring in intersectionality, I think, because a big part of my autistic experience and journey has also been around being biracial. And I think masking being something that was very familiar to me already, because that sense of being othered is something that I've had all of my life. So I think, again, what I'd love to see is, in broadening out the question, is a more, not even just acceptance, but embracing of non-normativity, whatever that looks like. So whether we're talking about gender, whether we're talking about sexuality, race, neurodivergence, all of those things, what our bodies look like, our abilities, just that kind of idea of, the very narrow idea of what normal is, can be expanded to include everybody.
Yeah, I love it, guys. You have absolutely blown me away today. Thank you so much for all this conversation here. Has been wonderful. And thank you for your honesty. The honesty is welcomed here on this podcast. It's been brilliant to have you. Our guests today have been Seth Cavendish, Ashley Crombie, and Dr. Emma Svanberg. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much for listening. We really hope you enjoyed this episode of Autism in Conversation with Auticon. If you'd like to know more about the podcast, would be interested in applying for a job as an Auticon consultant, or would like further information about how Auticon can help support your business to be more neuro-inclusive, please visit auticon.com/UK. This episode was recorded in February 2024. Recording and production was by Strathmore Studios in Clerkenwell, London. It was engineered by Alex Brown, edited by Billy Godfrey, and the music was by The Lethargies. That's all from us this time. Thanks again for listening, and bye for now.